For months, leaders had been struggling to reach a consensus on what to do about slavery, but agreement seemed impossible. Some warned that if Lincoln issued the proclamation now, it would look like an admission of defeat. The fate of the Emancipation Proclamation rested heavily on the fate of the Union Army. Lincoln understood that something had to change. Quietly but firmly, he said, "I've made this decision, and I hope it's right." In the summer of 1862, the war was in a desperate state. General McClellan came within 5 miles of Richmond, only to be defeated by Lee's army and forced to retreat. That retreat was devastating for both the Union cause and the American people. Lincoln realized the country had reached the end of its rope. Something had to shift. At the beginning of the Civil War, the goal was not to abolish slavery but simply to reunite the seceded states with the Union. Lincoln had always believed slavery was morally wrong. He once said, "If slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong." Yet he also believed the federal government had no authority to abolish slavery in states where it already existed. That summer, Lincoln withdrew to the soldiers' home, where he found time to reflect. There, he saw firsthand how enslaved people were being used to strengthen the Confederate cause. They built trenches and fortifications, worked as cooks and teamsters, and kept the farms and plantations running so that their owners could go to war. Lincoln realized that if the Confederacy was stripped of its enslaved labor, it would lose a vital advantage. An executive order freeing enslaved people could be justified as a military necessity under the president's war powers. This was the decision that would define his legacy and transform the nature of the war. On July 22nd, Lincoln presented his plan to his cabinet. For months, they had argued about slavery with no agreement in sight. In the famous depiction by Francis Carpenter, radicals pressed for immediate emancipation, moderates waited to be persuaded, and conservatives believed it would be a disastrous mistake. Some argued it would only make the war more violent. Others warned the South would never negotiate peace if slavery became the central issue. One even predicted Lincoln would lose the midterm elections, while another threatened to resign if emancipation went forward. But it was Secretary of State William Seward who made the most critical point. He cautioned that issuing the proclamation too soon would look like a desperate cry for help. Better to wait, he advised, until the eagle of victory takes flight, and then hang the proclamation around its neck. That moment came in September with the Battle of Antietam. Though it was one of the bloodiest days in American history, the Union managed to push Confederate forces out of Maryland and back south. Lincoln returned to his cabinet and said, "I wish it were a better time, but at least the rebel army has been forced out. I made a promise to my Maker that if this happened, I would issue the proclamation." He delayed its effect until January 1st, 1863, giving the South one last chance to free enslaved people voluntarily before they would be permanently lost if the rebellion continued. When the Emancipation Proclamation was published in newspapers across the country, it electrified abolitionist communities. In churches, meeting halls, and public squares, it was read aloud with great celebration. Crowds gathered outside the White House to serenade Lincoln, as they did whenever a Union victory was won. Humbly, Lincoln told them, "I've made this decision, and I hope it's right. I hope I haven't made a mistake." The people reassured him he had not, and the night was filled with exhilaration. In the South, however, enslaved people were kept in the dark. Newspapers were hidden from them, and posters were destroyed. For many, it would take months to even learn that freedom had been promised. Meanwhile, in the North, the future of the proclamation still depended on the Union Army. Defeats at Fredericksburg and other battles fueled resentment. Some even blamed emancipation for the setbacks, and doubts grew over whether Lincoln would carry through with it on New Year's Day. Frederick Douglass, who had often criticized Lincoln for being too slow, expressed confidence. "If we've learned anything about him," Douglass said, "Lincoln will never go backward." On New Year's Day, 1863, when Lincoln prepared to sign the proclamation, his hand trembled from hours of greeting visitors. He set the pen down. "If ever my soul were in an act, it is in this act," he said. "But if I sign with a shaking hand, posterity will say, 'He hesitated.'" So he waited until he could sign clearly and boldly. When he finally put his name to the document, applause erupted. People sang together, holding hands until dawn. The timing had been critical. 6 months earlier, he would have lost the border states and the war. Any later, and he would have lost the morale boost and the vital contribution of black troops to the Union cause. All his life, Lincoln had longed to achieve something that would ensure he was remembered. After signing the proclamation, he confided to an old friend, Perhaps in this measure, my fondest wish has been realized. Yet Lincoln refused to take credit. When called a liberator, he said, "Don't call me that. It was the Union soldiers and the anti-slavery movement that did it all." He believed true change came from the ground up, through the courage of citizens and soldiers alike. Still, even as he considered himself only an instrument, he was an instrument of history whose impact could never be denied.